Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Rose. Welcome to this beautiful reading. If someone suddenly became distant, stopped calling, stopped explaining themselves, or walked away when you thought the connection was becoming deeper, this message may help you understand what could have been happening beneath the surface. This is a collective reading, so take what resonates with your situation and gently leave the rest behind. Because sometimes silence looks like rejection, sometimes it looks like indifference. But sometimes silence is what happens when a person doesn't know how to face what they have done, what they feel, or what they might have to admit if they finally came back. And that is the energy I feel strongly here. They didn't necessarily go quiet because they stopped caring. They went quiet because facing you would have meant facing themselves. There is something they know they handled badly. They may not have admitted it to you, and they may not even openly admit it to the people around them, but somewhere inside, they know their behavior created pain. They know they could have communicated better. They know there were moments when you deserved an explanation and received distance instead. And the longer they stayed silent, the harder it became to return, because every day of silence added another layer of awkwardness, guilt, and fear. At first, they may have thought, I'll reach out later. Then later became tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. And eventually, the silence became so large that they didn't know how to cross it anymore. You may have been sitting there wondering what you did wrong. You may have questioned your conversations, your actions, your appearance, your worth, even the reality of the connection itself. But please hear this carefully. Their inability to communicate is not proof that you were not enough. You may have represented something emotionally significant to them, and that can be frightening for someone who isn't prepared for vulnerability. They could handle talking to you when everything felt light. They could handle attraction. They could handle attention. But when the connection began asking for honesty, consistency, and emotional responsibility, something inside them pulled back. They became overwhelmed. And instead of saying, I'm scared, they became distant. Instead of saying, I don't know how to handle this, they became quiet. Instead of saying, I care more than I expected, they acted as though they cared less. That is the contradiction surrounding this person. Their behavior and their inner world have not necessarily matched, and I feel there has been a lot of overthinking, especially during the quiet hours. When everything around them becomes still, memories of you can become much louder. They remember conversations. They remember the way you supported them. They remember moments when you were there without asking for anything in return. They remember the comfort they received from you, and they compare that with what life feels like without you. This is where a realization may have begun. They thought they could simply move forward and fill the space you left behind. Maybe they distracted themselves with work. Maybe they spent more time with friends. Maybe they tried talking to someone else. Maybe they convinced themselves that they were completely fine. But distraction is not the same thing as healing. Eventually, the quiet moments return. And that's when the memories return too. They may have discovered that not everyone gives the kind of emotional understanding you once gave them. Not everyone has the patience you had. Not everyone makes them feel seen in the same way. And that contrast may have made them understand your value differently. But there is another important layer here. They may also be afraid that you no longer see them the way you once did. They may imagine that you've become disappointed in them. They may wonder whether you've moved on. They may fear that if they call you, you'll answer with a cold voice. Or perhaps you won't answer at all, and that possibility terrifies them. Because silence gave them control. Calling you would mean surrendering that control. They wouldn't know what you would say. They wouldn't know whether you still care. They wouldn't know whether you would forgive them. And they certainly wouldn't know whether you would allow them back into your life. So they remain quiet, not because silence feels good, but because silence feels safer than rejection. And this is something you need to remember. You don't have to break that silence for them. You don't have to chase them down and ask why they disappeared. You don't have to prove that you're still available. You don't have to make their return comfortable. If they truly want to communicate, they have the ability to take that step. And I feel that eventually they may try to test the waters. It may not begin with the dramatic confession you imagine. It could be something incredibly simple. A random question, a reaction to something you posted, a casual message that appears almost meaningless. Or they may find some indirect reason to discover whether you're still receptive. Why would they do that? Because a direct emotional conversation requires courage. A small message doesn't. A casual conversation gives them an escape route. If you respond warmly, they can continue. If you don't, they can pretend they weren't trying to reconnect. but you should pay attention to this. Don't confuse contact with change. Someone returning is not automatically the same as someone returning with emotional maturity. If they come back, watch what they do. Do they acknowledge the distance? Do they take responsibility? Do they explain themselves honestly? Do they show consistency? Or do they simply want access to the comfort they once received from you? Those are very different things. And this is where your growth becomes important. Because I feel that while they were silent, you changed too. You may have reached a point where you're no longer willing to accept half effort. You may have stopped checking your phone constantly. You may have stopped wondering whether you should send another message. You may have started rebuilding your confidence. And perhaps their silence accidentally gave you something they never intended to give you: space to find yourself again. At one point, you may have been carrying the emotional weight for both people. You were analyzing, you were waiting, you were hoping, you were trying to understand. But now something has shifted. You are beginning to realize that love shouldn't require you to constantly convince someone to communicate. And that realization changes everything. Their silence may have hurt you, but it also revealed something. It revealed what happens when someone isn't ready to meet you emotionally. It showed you the difference between potential and consistency. It taught you that someone can have feelings and still be incapable of giving you the relationship you deserve. And that's a very important lesson, because having feelings for someone isn't the same as being ready to love them properly. This person may genuinely care. They may genuinely regret things. They may genuinely miss you, but they still have to decide what they are willing to do about those feelings. You cannot make that decision for them. There is also a strong sense that they have been replaying one particular mistake, something they said, something they failed to say, a decision they made too quickly, a moment when they could have chosen honesty but chose avoidance instead. And the more they reflect on it, the more they may realize that their silence didn't solve the problem. It simply postponed the conversation. Maybe they thought distance would make their feelings disappear. Instead, distance gave those feelings room to become clearer. And now they may be asking themselves, did I lose something I wasn't supposed to lose? Did I push away someone who genuinely cared? Would they even give me another chance? These questions can become very heavy. But there is something I want you to hear. You don't have to sit around waiting for their answers. Your life continues whether they speak or not. Your healing continues. Your dreams continue. Your future continues. If they return, let them meet the version of you that exists now, not the version they left behind. And if they don't return, that does not make your connection meaningless. Sometimes a person enters your life to reveal what you need, what you deserve, and what you will no longer tolerate. So don't measure your worth by someone's ability to communicate. Their silence may have been about fear. It may have been about shame. It may have been about emotional confusion. It may have been about pride. But none of those things make you less valuable. And if they eventually break the silence, remember this. You are allowed to listen without immediately reopening the door. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to need an apology. You are allowed to expect consistency. You are allowed to say, I need to see change before I trust this again. That isn't being difficult. That's self-respect. And perhaps this is the biggest shift in your story. You once wanted them to choose you. Now you're learning to choose yourself. You once wanted an explanation. Now you're learning that your peace doesn't have to depend on receiving one. You once feared losing them. Now you're realizing that losing yourself would have been far more painful. So if they are currently silent, let them sit with the silence they created. Don't chase, don't beg, don't abandon your dignity just to receive a few words. Let their actions speak when they're ready. Because if they genuinely want to repair what was broken, they will eventually have to move beyond hints and indirect signals. They will have to communicate. They will have to take responsibility. They will have to show you that the person who returns is not simply the same person repeating the same cycle. And if they cannot do that, then perhaps their silence has already answered one question for you. You deserve someone who doesn't make you constantly wonder where you stand. Someone who can speak when things become difficult. Someone who doesn't disappear when emotions become real. Someone who understands that communication isn't optional when you genuinely care about another person's heart. So take one more deep breath. Release the need to chase an answer. Release the urge to decode every little sign. Let them have their process, and you have yours. Your process is healing, growing, becoming stronger, and learning that love should not cost you your peace. Maybe one day they will finally tell you the truth. Maybe they will say, I didn't know how to face you. I was afraid. I knew I hurt you. I didn't know how to come back. I chose silence because I didn't know how to explain what was happening inside me. If that day comes, listen, but also remember everything you learned while they were gone. Their explanation can give you information. It doesn't have to determine your decision. You get to decide what happens next. And that is where your power has always been. So, beautiful soul, if this reading found you at the right moment, remember the message. Their silence does not define your worth. Sometimes people go quiet because they are overwhelmed by what they feel. Sometimes they disappear because facing you means facing themselves. And sometimes the person who chose silence eventually realizes that the silence didn't erase the connection. It only gave them more time to understand what they lost. But whether they return or not, don't stop walking forward. Your life is bigger than this unanswered question. Your future is bigger than this person's hesitation. And your heart deserves a love that doesn't leave you staring at a silent phone, wondering what went wrong. Let the silence teach you. Let it strengthen you. And most importantly, let it return you to yourself. Because perhaps the real reason they chose silence was never the ending you feared. Perhaps their silence became the space where you finally learned to hear your own voice. And that voice is telling you, choose yourself, protect your peace. Never settle for silence when you deserve honest love.